morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sactly, and holy smokes, probably the best forecasting episode we have ever had of all time. It is with the one and only VP of Sales over at Xactly, Taylor Wilding. Nick, why should people listen?
Taylor is an expert because he talks to probably dozens of orgs every single week about best practices for forecasting and how they forecast. And he went really deep in this episode on how you should be thinking about triangulating your forecast using a top-down model, a bottoms-up deal-backed model, and then AI, so that you have three different numbers that help inform the numbers that you are calling. From there, we went into some of the ways that he runs forecast calls, including a really interesting approach where he gets reps running the forecast call, questions that he asks, criteria that he looks for. If you are struggling to call accurate numbers, this is one of our best episodes as it relates to forecasting, Armand.
Alrighty, Taylor, welcome to the show. We start every leadership show with your top three actionable takeaways. Let's get your three.
Takeaway number one is really around rep-led forecast calls. The concept here is that the rep actually is going to lead the forecast calls. In the case that the forecast call is looking at current quarter, the deals, the inventory that you're working off, and how you're going to achieve the number that you're calling. And it's really about having a rep act as the sales leader in order for two things to happen. Number one is that the rep themselves is asking the questions of the team. They're asking the questions from each individual and understanding what is needed in that deal, identify the risk, identify executive alignment, those types of things in there. And then at the same time, as the sales leader, you have the opportunity to hear questions that you probably ask on a weekly basis that are like, you all of a sudden have the trigger in your head when you hear someone else ask it and say, God, that's a stupid question. What is the actual benefit? What is the value of that question to my team on a weekly basis? You will inevitably stop asking those questions that are useless and end up with zero value to your team. This is a roundtable situation, either physically or virtually, of course, where the sales rep is asking these questions about the deal inventory that you have in the quarter, and is also a great opportunity for those sellers that have aspirations to become sales leaders as well. So really good kind of career development opportunity at the same time.
Great, Taylor. What's number two?
Number two is target account strategy workshops. Everybody should be prioritizing the accounts within their patch and listing them out, tiering them out. In the case that you're, of course, doing that research, bring together a group, your SDR, your AEs, etc., and across multiple people within an organization in order to pick a single account to all do the desk research on. Leverage your tech stack that you might have, understand relationship mapping. You can even divide it up into different sections so that the SDRs are going after relationship mapping and understanding who's who in the zoo. Maybe the reps are actually looking at the objectives, objective motivation, success metrics, the things that you really need to tie value to. And then therefore, everyone's coming together and understanding, where did you find this information? Where did you find that information? And maybe unlock some different thoughts for everybody that can then be replicated across their entire account-based strategy as well. And of course, loop marketing in as they're going to hear things that you're doing, topics that you're discussing, and how they can apply it then to their marketing strategy as well, so that everything is unified.
All righty, bring us home. What's number three?
Revenue rush hour is the same but different from your typical call blocks that you have. If you're putting the team out and saying, hey, we're going to go call for 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours, this is a fun and exciting way to go do that and make sure that everybody is motivated. Depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish, it might be things like you want to extend conversations, you want to get more multi-threaded, you want to get more opportunities created, which everybody does, is really thinking about those small success metrics that you're looking for in order to build pipeline and making each hour dedicated to those things. Part of that might be in hour number one, you're really thinking about getting as many connects as you possibly can. Hour number two, you're thinking about really extending those conversations, trying to learn something, get referrals, things of that nature from within that call. And then hour number three, you're probably coming back to the original call list that you had in hour number one and recycling those and then give that second touch point in a small amount of time. And once again, breaking it down into hour by hour, bring the team back together, celebrate small wins, big wins. And at the same time, there's always going to be at least one of those very interesting calls. And so it's fun to celebrate or poke fun at those and learn from them along the way.
I want to go to this idea of the rep-led forecast call. So let's say I'm a rep on your team and I've never led one of these before. What instruction are you giving me prior to me running the forecast call for the whole team for the first time?
Foremost, Nick, hopefully as a sales leader, you're modeling the behavior that you would expect. So if you are being consistent with your forecasting methodology, you're doing that. At the same time, think about it as you have maybe 30 minutes because you're talking about the deal execution, the things that are needed. You have 30 minutes across 6 reps. So you got to break down the time and be very efficient there. So it's really asking about what are the deals that are going to happen in blood. These are the committed deals for that current quarter. Here's your backup deals, your upside deals, whatever the nomenclature you might be using, best case, and understanding what needs to happen in those in order to promote them into a committed deal. And then, of course, you have your pipeline deals that in a current fiscal quarter probably are not a whole lot of them, but really understanding what those are. And so making sure that the line of questioning is not an interrogation, but really a coaching opportunity in order for there to be action coming out of there. The last thing you want is, even as the rep doing it, is to be asking questions that feels like an interrogation. It's more so having that action coming off of that call that's going to be the most important thing.
So if I were to step into one of your managers' forecasting calls, how do you expect your reps to talk through their forecast? Because I've seen the reps literally go through every single deal by deal, and the other 7 reps in the room are like, their eyes are glazing over, and no one has context on what's going on in those opportunities. So what is the right way that you expect a rep to walk through their forecast?
It starts with, of course, from the top, the deals that are committed and what needs to happen still within those deals in order to have them come to fruition and get that ink on the paper. That's the first one, is really talk through the next steps that you have on there. And of course, understanding who's signing this thing is one of the most common mistakes that I've seen. So understanding who's going to sign it and what did the paper process actually look like to that. You're at the finish line. It's a committed deal. You should be understanding what the actual process to get the paperwork done. On the most likely deals is still, we should have executive alignment. So what does that look like? What are the next steps and what does that conversation look like from an executive alignment perspective as well? Do we have the close date correct? Are we forecasting it for the right month within the quarter? Depending on, of course, your deal velocity, making sure the dollar amount is correct. One of the biggest mistakes I see as well is that you take whatever's in Salesforce or your CRM of choice and using that number. So making sure that the number that is actually contributing to your forecast, your overall roll up, is accurate. And then, of course, what does that paper process look like again, and understanding who you need to get to. So really working from the top down, from committed deals to best case deals or most likely, but then also what is the actual number that you're contributing to the business for that particular quarter and backing into that. So think about it from a top down perspective. What is the number that you have assigned to you? What is your gap to that number? And then from the bottoms up perspective, which I just illustrated more in depth, is the actual deals that make that up.
Could you talk about what your forecast categories are? So you talked about commit and best case, and what goes into each of those, or what qualifies in each category.
At Xactly, we use commit, best case, or upside rather, and pipeline. So starting from commit is that this deal is going to happen in the timeline that you're saying it's going to happen. So it's a part of your deal back forecast. The dollar amount that it's going to come in, plus or minus 10%. The economic buyer, you have engagement with that economic buyer. And so there's 2 things there. There's identification of the economic buyer and there's engagement with the economic buyer. Identification means you know who it is, but you're not connected. And engagement means you've actually had a conversation, be it via email or in person or virtually, of course. So those are the attributes that we're looking for a committed deal. When we think about the upside deals or best case, is that you're thinking about, this is your second tier deal in order to get to that budgeted number or your call, whichever one, and understanding, of course, all those same things I talked about from a committed deal, or at least having a plan to get to those within a short amount of time. Thinking about where you're at within the quarter is, of course, going to dictate that. So if you're towards the end of your quarter and you still don't know those things, that's probably more of a next quarter type of opportunity. And then, of course, pipeline are your early stage, maybe fast movers, depending on the deal velocity that you have. A lot of our customers are more transactional. So thinking about their business in comparison to ours, where it's really 60, 90 days. If it's not in the quarter, it's probably not happening. So our create and close within the quarters is not very frequent. There's not a whole lot of pipeline deals, to be quite honest with you, within a current quarter forecast call.
Just to recap what I'm hearing from you, it's Nick's turn and he's the AE on the team. What you're expecting to hear from Nick is, hey, here's where I am right now as it relates to quota attainment. Here's where I need to get to. Here's what the gap is. And here are the deals in my forecast that make up that gap. You're expecting them to talk through their commit deals first, which are the ones where they're like, these are the ones that are coming in. Piece number 1, the dollar amount. Piece number 2, the identification of the economic buyer. And then piece number 3, whether or not we have engagement with that economic buyer. And the timeline and the close date. Okay, so those are the 4 things that you're looking for.
If it's a committed deal, we want engagement, or at least a path to engagement where maybe the buyer that you're talking to or your champion is telling you, once we get through gate A, B, or C, you will have access to the economic buyer. And so at least have that plan or understanding or agreement with your champion as to how you're going to get engaged with the economic.
So if I don't have engagement, I'm talking through my plan. So
Bingo.
Commit deals get dollar amount, close date, ID of EB, and plan to get to the EB if we are not already engaged with them. From there, I move to my upside deals, where I'm sharing the same information that I did for those commit deals, but I'm also maybe giving a little bit more detail on like my plan to get this one closed. And then from there, I go to pipeline.
Yep.
Question for you, which is how long should this generally take an AE to talk through? And then what does the sales leader actually do from a questioning perspective as a follow-up?
The commit deals should be very fast, right?
Okay.
That should already, because it's progressed. It's already gone through the pipeline and then to the upside, and now it's in commit. Really, it comes down to the commit deal should be very quick. Here's the 2 things that I'm doing this week. Here's the 3 things I'm doing next week, etc. There's tools out there that can help you with mutual action plans and make sure that you have that all mapped out, and that's part of it as well. The next part of it is, of course, on the upside deals. Those are going to take a little bit longer, but keep in mind, if you're on a team of 6, 7 people and you're running through these deals, depending on the amount of deals that you have within your inventory, it's pretty rapid fire. You need to be prepared. You need to have links up if you're using an interface, and I recommend 100% that you have up Salesforce, you have up Xactly forecasting, you have up whatever it is that you're leveraging in order to run this. They should have those tabs open in Xactly forecasting. You can see it all in a tabular or table format, so it's very easy to click in the Mini-Op 360 and see what's happening within the deal. So that makes it very efficient. It's not just a system of record, right? It's a system of engagement. And so leveraging that in order to make sure that we're out there doing the right things and not just reporting the news, we're out there making the news.
Taylor, I want to underscore something you said, which is really important, which is the commits should not take long to go through. And the reason for that is you have 3 or 4 criteria that are objective. They are clearly objective of this is what makes a deal a commit. And I've seen a lot of sales leaders say things like, a commit, you should be able to explain it in 3 different ways. Or a commit is something where you're putting your badge on it, where you know it's going to come in. The problem is everyone has a different definition of that. But you have a very clear definition of what a deal needs to look like in order for you to be able to put your badge on it and call it a commit. You talked about how your commit number is deal backed. Could you explain what that means?
There's really 3 different ways I think about forecast. And it's top down, thinking about here's the number that's been assigned to me. Here's the path to get there. Then you've got a bottoms up forecast, which is the deal back. So this is the actual deal inventory, deal by deal, deal A, deal B, deal C, that make up, let's call it 100K, 200K, 300K. So I just put myself into 600K worth of deals that then contribute to that number that I'm calling. And that call is what I'm putting out and publishing to my sales leader, to my CRO, ultimately to the board. When you're looking at that bottoms up forecast, you've got to make sure that there's a couple of things that are really tight there. One of those things being the deal value. Oftentimes leveraging the number that's in Salesforce, unless you're very, very sophisticated with your pricing models, and not only where you're starting, but more importantly, where you're going to end up, you need to probably, as a sales leader, hedge that number to a certain degree, right? Or if you know that you have a sandbagger out there, you might need to also think about the upside of those deals from a dollar amount perspective. Those are some of the things that I think about needing there, is that on the bottoms up perspective. And then the last piece of that triangle is AI. What are you looking at from an overall conversion rate perspective? A lot of companies are just using a center weighted forecast, which is another term. So thinking about based on the stage that they're at, they have a probability of closure. Stage 2 is 10%, stage 3 is 15%, so on and so forth. But how do you actually look at historical conversion rates by rep, by category, maybe by product, et cetera? So those are some of the other things that, of course, having that ability to do, looking at data models in order to triangulate and understand not only your gut, but also what is the data telling us from a top down, bottoms up, and then AI perspective.
So you talked about deal back calls, you need to account for price deflation or discounts. And we talked about this on a webinar that you and I did a couple months back, which is you could have all these reps. Everyone's calling a 100K deal. Let's say you have 10 reps, each calling a 100K deal on the month. You have $1 million number. You're like, great, I'm going to hit my number. They're all commit. They're all rock solid. They all got timeline, dollars, everything, right? Problem is 100 grand is list price.
Sure.
And so everyone can close their deals. and you can still miss your forecast by 20% if that is your average discount price. So you either need to factor that in your model, or you need to make sure that your reps are not calling list price. They're calling where they actually believe the deal is going to land. Let's say that I'm a rep and I'm calling a $100,000 commit and I have a $50,000 deal size. Does that mean that I have exactly 2 deals, each at $50K, that add up to $100K? Or is there a world in which I have 4 deals that I think are like 50-50 deals, and I think 2 will land? Like, how do you account for the spread versus a deal by deal count?
When you were talking about the 10 deals at 100K, I already was getting anxiety over that feeling, that thought, as to having one path to getting to $1 million. That's what you want to avoid. So to your point, there is the deal inventory that makes it up. You want to have multiple paths to get there. If you sit and hold yourself to one path, you will 100% of the time miss the call. You have to have multiple paths to get there. And so that might mean that you're not calling as high of a number as you maybe wanted, especially at the beginning of the quarter. We're talking about a 13-week journey here. At the end of month 1, you should really have 50% deal backed to the number that you're calling. By the end of month 2, you should really have 60% of those deals closed. Most of us out there right now have a hockey stick. Month 3 is where a majority of those deals are coming from. So you have to be at 60% of that number closed by the time you get to month 3 in order to be really efficient and accurate. Thinking about the different paths that you have to get there is really important there as well, because if you're banking on one path and then you're banking on everything happening in the last week of the quarter, you're pigeonholing yourself. So multiple paths to get there. And then, of course, tracking your linearity based on your conversion rates. And your business might be different. So understanding what that data looks like in order to then execute on a consistent model, or fix what needs to be fixed in order to execute on a consistent model.
When we switched from monthly to quarterly forecasting at Pave, because we were moving up market, more mid-market enterprise deals, and it was month 1 in the quarter, and I had reps who the vast majority of their deals were best case deals, because we didn't have an EB identified and engaged in every single one of those deals. We knew the path to get there, but the reality is a lot of the deals were closed out previously in the quarter, and they had a lot of junior pipeline. So I would get these reps who would have a $600K best case call and a $0 commit. And I'd be like, well, you're going to close some of these best case deals. Right. Like, you have 15 in your pipeline and they look like they have good momentum. So if I'm a rep and I have 10 best case deals in my pipeline, but none of them are commit by your qualification, do I put a $0 as my commit number? Or how do I think about calling a commit early in the quarter?
Reps calling $0 when they have viable pipeline should not be a thing. It comes down to deal execution. It comes back to executive sponsorship early on. And that's, to me, a coaching opportunity that if you have a rep in your situation that just said they have 600K in best case deals, you've either got a hygiene problem where they don't belong in that quarter, or you have an executive alignment or a deal execution issue. If that's the case, what is the root cause of this? Why do we have 600K worth of deals that we're not banking on a single one of those deals to contribute to our revenue capture here this quarter? And so really getting to that piece of it, without clean and healthy pipeline, you can't even begin to understand what sufficient pipeline looks like. And that goes back to having the right close dates, having the right economic buyer aligned, et cetera. That deal inventory that makes up the 600K, let's go in and actually coach to those deals at another level in a side call, probably outside of a forecast call, to understand what needs to happen in those to progress them. So it's like a deal progression call more than a pipeline call or forecast call.
Let's assume that I have 5 sales stages and I've got a good number of deals in stage 3. So it's still like middle pipeline, middle deal cycle, but I'm feeling good about them. I have a clear path to close them. But again, they're not exactly commit deals yet based on the criteria. Let's say I have 4 stage 3 deals. How would you coach a rep to make their commit call? Is it like taking the average win rate from stage 3 and being like, we win 50% of deals at stage 3? Is it saying, I think I'm going to land 1 in 3 or 1 in 4? Like, how do I actually turn those deals into a forecast call?
Yeah. So you just described top down. You're looking at the 4 deals. You're looking at conversion rate, et cetera. So that's one data point that you have. So of the 600K worth of deals, based on historical data, that you can anticipate that, I'll just throw a number out there, you're going to get 250K of that. So that's the top-down perspective. Now, if you look at the deal inventory that makes up the 600K, you look at the attributes of each deal. A, do we have an economic buyer? B, do we know their paper process? Most importantly, are we the solution of choice? Are we the desired solution? Have we actually received that nod from our future customers, I like to call them, to understand that we're the right solution, we're the best fit for them, and it really comes down to contracting and et cetera? Then that's the bottoms up perspective. Understanding what that paper process is, whether or not it fits within the time barriers that we have, or better yet, what do we need to do to accelerate that if necessary? Is that something that they're willing to do? Or is another attribute. The third part is let the data work for you, and understanding what those historical conversion rates are, the AI component, et cetera, to say this person is going to push 70% of this out, but they're going to win 30% of it. And then you have that data point to do a sanity check or a gut check on what it is you're seeing from a bottoms up and a top down perspective.
If I'm a rep and I'm putting together my forecast, you used the word triangulate earlier. I'm looking at 3 different types of forecasts to inform what I actually give to my sales leader. The first one that you shared is the top down, where I'm looking at, okay, I've got all these deals in stage 3 where I don't have all those criteria that make me say that I can commit these deals, but I can apply looking at historical win rates of my stage 3 deals and the ones that I feel pretty good about and say, okay, generally we win X percentage, so I'm going to call this number from a top down perspective. Bottoms up, I'm looking at those deals and I'm going deal by deal by deal. And in the example Armand shared, I think my bottoms up forecast, I don't really have anything, but that's why I'm triangulating. I'm looking at all
Correct.
3. And then the third is I'm using some sort of AI forecasting tool that's going to look at probably far more in depth of the historical data. And so I have to look at bottoms up, top down, and AI. And when I use those 3, that helps me call the most accurate number. If I just rely on bottoms up, I get that scenario where I've got 10 deals, 50K each, but I'm calling a 0 number because they're all still just in stage 3. Am I getting that right?
Spot on. You hit the nail on the head there.
To tie this all together, you gave us some goalposts earlier in the interview. Let's say that the top-down forecast, the weighted pipeline forecast, says that based on my pipeline, I'm going to close 250K this quarter. By the end of month 1, you want to have 50% of that call deal backed, which means of that 250K, 125K are backed by real deals. Meaning you can literally count the deals that get you to $125,000 inside of your commit. Is that right?
Correct. That's right.
Fantastic.
And then by the end of month 2, you should have closed 60% of those dollars.
Yeah.
If you're going into month 3 and you haven't yet hit 60%, you have to have that real honest conversation with yourself of what's going to change, what's different in month 3 that has not been true in month 2 and month 1. And it might be just the deal age. There's different reasons for it, but you have to at least be honest with yourself and to your leadership.
One of the things that you mentioned in one of your actionable takeaways in the beginning is when you put a rep in the driver's seat of leading the forecast call, you'll hear them ask questions that you're also asking, and you're like, wait, we shouldn't be asking that. That's not helpful. Yeah. I guess outside of asking about what's the dollar amount, have we ID'd the EB, is the EB engaged, or what's our plan, and what's the close date, are there other questions that you're asking about these commit deals in a forecast call?
Yes and no. In a forecast call, the thing that I really want to know the most, and I think is what we all have to be thinking about right now in the landscape that we're in, is what is this initiative laddering up to from a corporate objectives perspective to where the economic buyer, the C-suite, the true decision makers, that this matters to them. And if you don't have that answer, then there's a serious problem. And if we don't understand what this initiative that we're selling into and the problem that we're solving, if we're not obsessed with the problem and allowing for them to meet their desired business outcomes with our solution being a helping hand there, or the actual thing that's going to make that help that be accomplished, we are probably not in a committed deal. We probably have some issues here to build up the value of our solution. And it might be in the case of a business case, quantifying ROI. It might be about getting that executive alignment, making sure that we're having the right conversations because you're banking on your champion, your catalyst to go sell on your behalf. They might not have the right tools. So you need to enable them, and in all likelihood need to be the one that's out there getting it done as well.
I'm a manager. I've received all of these forecast calls, and now I need to make my team call for the mid-market sales team or the enterprise sales team. My guess is you're not just adding up all the forecast calls and saying, here's my number. There's a lot of art and science in this. Some people basically say managers should be doing a deal by deal call as well, based on as if their entire pipeline was all of their reps' pipeline. Other people say they need to know the personalities of the reps and hedge for the ones who are sandbaggers versus not. How do you instruct your managers to guide their forecast?
Depends on the volume that you're doing, the number of deals that you have, and the reality of a manager knowing the ins and outs of every single deal that is in the commit, right? So I'll put an asterisk next to that. But if your teams are structured as such to where you have 5, 6, up to 8 people, you should know the deals and be intimate with them to know what's happening within them. That is my expectation of my managers, is that they can tell me just as well as the rep as to what's going on within the deal. They have the tools at their fingertips to say, hey, this is to jog my memory. This is what's happening here. Here's the next step, etc. But in all reality, if your deal inventory or your volume is as such that that's not possible, then at least having it documented and be able to reference it is 100% necessary. So I do expect them to be able to have a bottoms up forecast, but more importantly is really that top down as to how is the data actually supporting that, and talk me through it. We actually start with the top down. Tell me about your quota. Tell me about your call. Tell me about the data that gets you there. And then what are the deals that actually get you to that number that you're saying you're going to do? And where's the risk in that? Where's the riskiest of the deals, even in your commit? Where's the risk? And then what's your backup? What's your plan B? You can't have one path to your number. If you have one path to your number, it's a tightrope. And if you fall off that tightrope, you're absolutely done.
You gave me a really good answer on the top down portion, especially. And I'm curious on the bottoms up side, is the manager making a deal by deal call if they're calling $1 million number? For example, are they going to that level of granularity, or are they basically saying, look, this is what all my reps are calling, here's what I'm calling each rep at? In other words, are they like rolling up their reps into a forecast call, or are they still calling every single deal one by one?
It's both to a degree, and the reason for that is that we want the reps to be thinking about what they're publishing. By publishing, I mean what it is that they're putting out there and saying, I'm going to do 250K this quarter, and here's the deals that I'm going to get to. It is a matter of, for the first line sales leader to say also, in aggregate, I have 5 reps that are each saying they're going to do 200K. We're going to do $1 million. I want them to be able to say that I'm rolling that up. But to your point, I'm not going to call every dollar that they're saying, but here's the backing to get there. So that's where the top down and the bottoms up come together to meet those in the middle, or at least justify why the number is different. I also want to know from sales leaders is, what is your best case? If you run the table, all stars align, what is the best we can expect? That then stimulates the conversation of, okay, what do we need to do in these deals that are the ones that help us get to that best case? And you start really thinking about mending that gap to hit that high number. And then what ends up happening there is you start really laying a stronger foundation of the deals that give you multiple paths to get there, is what inevitably happens there, and naturally happens when you start thinking about how do we get to our best case.
Taylor, this was a freaking clinic on forecasting. Unfortunately, we have to move to the final question.
Yeah.
We talked about a lot of good habits related to forecasting, but what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all teams get a little bit better?
The worst habit to me is not knowing the paper process. If you don't know the paper process, you don't know the path to execution. I used to do my homework all the time, and I wouldn't turn it in. And so I was sitting at my desk and I got no credit for it. That is the same thing as working your tail off to build value within a deal, get the economic buyer, get all these things, and then not knowing what the path to closure is, and whether or not that person's going to be on vacation at the end of the quarter, if that person's going to be unavailable because of Halloween. Are they trick-or-treating with their kids? Or do they have kids? Like, that's building a relationship that's going to then allow you to understand what those things are. And if you don't understand the paper process and the actual deal execution motion, you're in big, big trouble.
We are going to include a series of resources in the show notes. But first, everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Taylor Wilding. What do you have for your 2?
So my first one is, you should be going through your commit deals on a forecast call pretty quickly. There's 4 things that a rep should be reporting as it relates to details related to their commit deals. They should be communicating dollar amount, close date, who the economic buyer is, and whether or not the economic buyer is actually engaged. And if they're not, their plan to get that party engaged. Number 2 was you shouldn't be basing your forecast off of just one model. The 3 models that Taylor recommended were a top-down approach where you're looking at what is the number, what's the pipeline, and what's the conversion rate from stage to stage to stage. This was particularly helpful if you have a lot of pipeline or earlier stage deals that you think are going to come in, but they're not at the point of being commit deals because you don't have the 4 questions where you're like thumbs up. So that's approach 1. Approach 2 is bottoms up, where you're going deal by deal by deal, and you're determining how those roll up to a number. And then piece number 3 is using AI to help with forecasting data. And so when you use all 3, you will call far more accurately.
Number 3. 3 different milestones for 3 months in the quarter. By the end of month 1, you want to have 50% of your top-down forecast deal-backed. By the end of month 2, you want to have 60% of your deals closed. And then by the end of month 3, you want to have 100% of your deals closed. And then lastly, number 4, I found it really interesting how the vast majority of the forecast call is not spent on the commit deals because the criteria is so clear for what a commit should be. It's just checking those boxes. The majority of the time is spent on the best case deals and figuring out how you can add 2 or 3 more ways to hit your number by pulling in some best case opportunities. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
So we put together a ton of different forecasting resources. There's links in the show notes. Go grab them. They're really, really helpful if you're trying to visualize how this should all roll up. Check it out, and we'll see you next week on the show.